morning, everyone. How's everybody doing today? I hope that you're all doing great. I'm excited for another day of class. We've been talking about all kinds of stuff. Really, yesterday we were talking about a great passion of mine about several different really awesome men and women of God and people like Saint Patrick and others, and how the gospel reached different nations in the world, in history. And there was actually one story that I forgot to tell you yesterday, which I'm surprised I forgot it, because one of my favorite stories in history, even though it's probably one of the saddest stories in the church history anyway. And that's the story about in the year 1266, whenever Mongolia was the world power of the day. So Mongolia was like the United States of its day, or the Rome, or whatever you want to call it. That was Mongolia. And in Mongolia, they had an emperor whose name was Kublai Khan. And Kublai Khan, one day he sees how the church in Europe had grown. And Kublai Khan, he notices that there's a lot of prosperity, there's great just blessing that are on these nations that are following Jesus. So Kublai Khan, being the emperor of the greatest power in the world at that time, he decided that he wanted that for his nation as well. So he actually sent a letter. Oh, happy birthday, Scott. So he sent a letter to Christopher Columbus. He actually sent a letter to Christopher Columbus's uncle. Or no, sorry, not Christopher Columbus. I'm way off there. Marco Polo. How many of you guys know the game Marco Polo? Well, he sent a letter to Marco Polo's uncle. Marco Polo and Marco Polo's uncle, his name was Niccolo Polo, and they were both Christians. So he sent a letter to them. Of course, Marco Polo was a very famous explorer, and so Kublai Khan, he sends this letter to them, basically asking them if they would go ask the Pope to send 100 missionaries to Mongolia. And he offered not just to bring those missionaries in, but he offered to give them everything, to feed them, to house them, to give them the money that they needed to pay for their travel expenses, everything. And back then, I mean, that was like the president of the United States, like Donald Trump. It was like Donald Trump giving you a call and saying, "Hey, I will pay for absolutely all of your needs. I will give you a house. I'll give you everything you need if you will just come to the United States, if you're overseas, if you'll come to the United States and just preach the gospel. That's all I want you to do." And so Niccolo Polo and Marco Polo, they take this message from Kublai Khan and they go to the Pope, because they're very famous people, so they have access to the Pope. And they tell him, that they basically bring this letter that Kublai Khan had sent. They go to the Pope and they tell him about this invitation that Kublai Khan had sent. So they give this information to the Pope, and the Pope, he is of course in agreement with it. Hey, they want us to make Mongolia a Christian nation, and they want us to bring 100 missionaries, completely free ride, 100 missionaries all the way over to Mongolia, everything that we need, all the horses, everything that we need. This is in 1266. And so the Pope, he sends out this message throughout the European world, throughout the Christian world, and makes this invitation. And I mean, it's an awesome invitation. Imagine if that kind of invitation went out today. Well, he sends out this invitation. You can imagine the just incredible amount of people that wanted to come and do this go on this incredible adventure, go to this world power, and be able to, with full liberty, preach the gospel. The multitudes of people that answered. Well, unfortunately, it was not multitudes. Unfortunately, only 2 people answered that call. 2 people responded to the call to Mongolia, and as a result, only 2 people went. One of those guys died on the way. He got sick and he died on the way to Mongolia. And the other, because he was just one person, ended up having very little effect on the world there. And it was a very, very sad story. But I bring this story up not just because I like the story, but not just because it's an important story, but because of the impact that it had on our church today. Because you see, Mongolia was the world power of the day. So it wasn't as small as it was today. It was part of most of that Asian region that it is in right now. They dominated that area. And I might be able to show you on a map later on here in this session. But the issue was that because 100 missionaries did not respond to the call, that area is still, to this day, is the most unreached area on the planet. And we're going to talk about that. That's what today is going to be about, is that part of the world. And I want you to be thinking, I want you to kind of keep this in the back of your mind as we go throughout this day, and as you see all these different nations and people groups that we're going to be looking at, because we're changing gears here. We're going into a very different aspect of this class. We're going really into maps. We're going to be talking about a lot about maps and statistics and numbers and all kinds of people groups. Just going to be a huge variety of things. Now, I just want to say before, whenever I get into this part of the class, which is the majority of the rest of these classes are going to be this, all right, what we're getting into right now today. And there are so many numbers and there are so many statistics. I will try to move slower because I know I tend to talk really fast. I will try to move slower through these videos so that you can write down as much as possible. But I also want you to know, if you cannot write it all down, don't worry. You can get all of these slides. You can get all of these videos. Just speak to your leader, and I can make the link available. I think I mentioned this in the first day as well. But I'm more than happy to make this available for anybody who wants the notes, who wants all the information. I have, I don't know, it's dozens and dozens of pages of notes that I go through, which is why I spend so much time looking at my notes here on my Kindle, because I just, especially today and these next couple days here, because I just have tons and tons of notes. So I will try to maintain a slower pace so that you can write down as much as possible. But as we go through this, I want you to be keeping in the back of your mind that this situation that we're seeing right now, these unreached people groups are largely because in that year 1266, if 100 missionaries had gone out to Mongolia, the whole world would probably be in reverse right now. Either the entire world would be a Christian nation, or Asia would be Christian, and we would be the ones that they're trying to reach, which is actually kind of getting to that point now in a lot of areas. But the lack of obedience from just 100 missionaries completely changed the course of the world. Now think about this, guys. Today, in this day and age, if you have a church of just 100 people, it's considered, in many cases, it's considered a failure, especially in the United States. Now, in Latin America, like in Panama, if you have 100 people, that's a great sized church. But in most developed nations, 100 people is such a small church that a lot of people will look down on it, when the truth is 100 people could have completely changed the history of the world if they had gone. But because of that disobedience, they did it. So it doesn't really take a lot of people to change the world. It just takes people who are willing to be obedient whenever that door opens, and be able to make that sacrifice when that door opens. And I guarantee you, throughout your life, there will be doors that open, and whether or not you choose to go through that door is going to have a major impact on your life, your children's lives, and the people around you, their lives as well. So I use this story to strongly urge you to keep your eyes open for the doors that open for you. The people that were called, this is one thing that people, now I want to be careful how I say this. A lot of people, they miss out on the call of God because they're waiting for the angel to appear to them, or they're waiting for some really big confirmation to happen, when sometimes it's a smaller confirmation. The people that, the Pope was probably not expecting an invitation from Kublai Khan at that time. And the Christians who received the letters, who God called, I am convinced that God had 100 people that he was calling to go, and 98 of them completely disobeyed God. I fully believe that. And I believe those 98 people are still probably, if they're in heaven, then I am sure that that's something that, well, they've been forgiven of it and everything, but it's just something that throughout history, it's just something that is in their being, in their lives. So, and that's just something that hangs over them. It's like John Ryland. He's known for young man sit down. The heathen will come. The Lord will bring the heathen to Himself with or without us. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. Let me just move into this. I have a story that I want to tell you. And if I can get this thing to shrink, yes, that is me. But where is the corner of this? There we go. All right, so I'm going to bring these slides up. I want to show you this. Oh, I don't know what's happening over here. I want to show you. Oh, he just went away. Hold on, guys. There we go. Okay, so I want to show you these slides real quick. So this is me, long, long ago. This is whenever I was living in Turkey. This picture here was taken in Istanbul. How old was I here? I was 18 years old here in this picture, and that guy next to me, his name is Mehmet. He is a Turkish Christian. He was our translator whenever I was in Turkey because none of us really spoke Turkish very much. And I want to share these stories, these pictures with you because something very awesome happened. And you get these little stories as you go through ministry, as you go throughout your life with the Lord. I'm going to bring it up full screen. As you go throughout your life with the Lord, you are going to go through all kinds of difficulties, all kinds of things that are going to happen, but you're also going to have really awesome testimonies, really awesome stories that the Lord lets you be a part of. So on this particular day, we were doing Bible distribution in Turkey. And Bible distribution is something, at least back then, well, it's even actually harsher now. It was not a legal thing to do. You could technically hand out Bibles, but if you got caught, well, there were several aspects to it. Turkey is a 99.8% Muslim nation, and so they're very against the gospel for the most part. They're taught that the gospel is evil. They're taught that Christians are liars and will deceive you, and we will get into why on that later on. But so you often have hostility towards Christians, and also it is illegal to try to convert a minor in that nation. So anyone under the age of 18, that's a pretty common law in a lot of those kind of nations that are fairly modernized, like Turkey that wants to be part of the European Union. It's fairly modernized, but at the same time, they still are maintaining their old traditions. And of course, they're very, very, how would I say that? They're very vehemently for Islam and against Christianity. So you could legally hand out Bibles, but you would oftentimes get a lot of people get angry at you, throw Bibles at you. People get beat up sometimes, and the police would often arrest us. We usually had to be prepared for being arrested. There's just all kinds of things because people would take a Bible from you, smile at you, and then go give it to a 10-year-old, and then take them to the police and say that you gave it to that 10-year-old. And so you get in a lot of trouble. People still get arrested to this day over this kind of stuff. So this is myself. This is 18. We're going into a Bible distribution. We prepared for months for this, which I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute. But you can see it's very, very early in the morning. And the reason why was because we would have to go early in the morning and we would go down to the docks. This was a privately hired boat. And we would load up this boat. These boxes are full of Bibles. We would load up these boats with just thousands and thousands of Bibles. And then we would have to take that boat from the Asian side where we were over to the European side. And it was all pretty covert. We didn't do this. You can see we're playing music. We were doing worship, of course, on our way over as you would. But it's all it's a very covert thing. And to this day, it actually is more so now. A lot of the missionaries have been kicked out. I don't know if any of these missionaries in these pictures are even there anymore. There's one or two, but they are in completely different areas now because the persecution got so strong. So we go across, and this is our team. This is a big mix of different ministries. And we've got Operation Mobilization here. We've got International House of Prayer here. We've got, of course, YWAM here. There's a couple different YWAM teams in this picture. And there are several different other smaller ministries as well. Like I said, I don't know if any of these people, there are some people who I could point out if I was there and I could just point at the screen. There are some people who are still there, but they're not in that same location anymore, or they're with different ministries now. And so it was a pretty cool time for us to be there. So we all get there, we get to the shore, unload all the Bibles. After we unloaded all the Bibles, and you got to load them up on these carts. The carts take them all the way up this hill. And just pull up this screen here. Now, these strings, so we're in a place called Buyukara, which means big island in Turkish. And this is a place where people would go, they go once a year, it's this big festival, and they tie these strings to the bottom of this, it's like I don't want to say a mountain, it's a island with a really big hill. And so people would come and they would tie a string at the bottom of the hill, and then they would take the string all the way up to the very top of the hill. The string for them, now this is not a Muslim practice, but the thing that if you go to a Muslim country that you will find out very quickly, just like in Catholic cultures as well, that it is almost never, very, very rarely do you find it to be just pure Islam or pure Catholicism. It is almost always mixed in with old traditional religions, and that's what the Muslims here in Istanbul have done as well. This is not a Muslim practice, but this is an old Greek Orthodox practice, actually, that they incorporated into Islam in that part of Turkey. So they would take these strings all the way up to the top of the hill, and there's a Greek Orthodox church at the top of that hill, and a priest would come out and they would give them a key, and that key was supposed to represent the answer to their prayers. There were a lot of people who were going because they wanted to have a child or because there was sickness. Like there, I don't have any pictures of it, but there's a big rock up on that same hill at the very top where people would slide down, and they believed that if they were to slide down that rock that they would get healed. And there are, I mean, those kinds of rocks are everywhere, actually. I mean, they have them in Latin America all over the place, too, where people will slide down these rocks and they think that they're going to get healed by it. And the ribbons that you see in here, those represent different specific prayer requests. And so that was the day that we were out there. And we chose that day for Bible distribution because on that particular day, there were so many people out there selling things and so many different religious rituals out there that it was one of the safest days that you could go out and do something Christian and hand out Bibles, because there was so much going on that it was very unlikely that you were going to get into any real trouble up there. So this, I always show this picture. This really kind of shows you what it usually looked like. I'm showing you all this because this is a very special day, a very impactful day for me. But this picture here, it shows you kind of what the average Bible distribution looked like. We'd have that table over there with lots of Bibles on it, and then, you know, all the boxes of Bibles that were there. People would come by walking, and generally it looked like this. We were kind of standing around. You try to hand out a Bible every now and then, and sometimes people would look at it, get mad, and give it back to you, or throw it on the ground, or whatever it was they would do. And you try to do whatever you could to get out as many Bibles as possible. And we usually hand out a lot of them, but it was a grind, you know. It was not the easiest thing to do. We basically were out there. You see people, you know, those two ladies over there hugging. You know, we enjoyed ourselves, but it was a difficult ministry to do because the people are they're so wary and leery of the gospel. So this is what it generally looked like. But this day was so special. It was so different because these are the people from the International House of Prayer. All of a sudden, we had some ladies come up and ask for prayer, which was not super normal. You don't, at least back then when I was there, we almost never had people just come up and ask for prayer. And so these ladies who were really awesome, they started praying for these women, and then God really started to move in a way that I had never seen in my life. I grew up in a very, very conservative church. I didn't know anything. And so God started moving in this way. I'm just trying to pull the slide up. Oh, so these are my leaders back then. These were the leaders of the YWAM youth ministry team in Turkey. They're actually not still there. Sorry. They actually just got kicked out of Turkey just like a month ago. And they were there. I mean, after I left, they stayed, and they were that little boy there is Jaden. He's like 13 or 14 now. I just saw him. Well, it was about 6 months ago that I saw him. And so they actually are now in another nation, which they're in another an even more closed nation that I'm sure they wouldn't want me to mention on this video. So, but just if you think of them, Steve and Jonna, pray for them because they're in a very closed nation and they need your prayers. And so, but you can see in the background that there were, after the ladies from the house of prayer started praying for people, more people started showing up. And this was the most incredible thing. More and more people started showing up. And then this person here, this was a news reporter who came and started filming, because more and more people started showing up. You can see we aren't even, some of it, like I was still handing out Bibles at this point, but most of us now were just trying to keep up with praying for all the people who were showing up. And it was getting really crazy because the presence of God came on that place. And it was probably, I believe, if I remember correctly, because there were a couple moments like this in Turkey, I believe it was the first time that I ever felt the presence of God like this, to this intensity, where people talk about how there's this weight, like this, they always call it like the weighty presence of God, this really strong presence of God. It was the first time I had felt anything like that. And to be honest, I didn't even believe in any of that. Whenever I first came into YWAM, because my DTS didn't teach on any of that stuff. My School of Frontier Missions didn't teach on anything. And my church never taught me about the power of God. They taught, my church is a really awesome church, but very, very conservative in that part. At least they always have been when I was growing up. You know, some people would like speak in tongues, but it was not something anybody taught on, or miracles or angels or the power of God or any of that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about it. And so whenever I came here to Turkey and we started having all of these really, really crazy supernatural things start happening, I actually completely freaked out and almost left on day one. I mean, literally on day one, I arrived because they wanted me to go to the Central Asia conference, YWAM conference in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I ended up going. Actually, it wasn't in Istanbul, it was another city. I ended up going to that conference. I arrived in Turkey, and the next day we went to that conference, and all these crazy manifestations were happening, and I was just like, well, I'm out. This is crazy. I've been tricked into a cult of some kind, and I actually almost left, very, very close to leaving actually. But thankfully some of the leaders understood, and they were able to talk to me a little bit and show me some scripture and stuff, and I hesitantly stayed longer and longer. And now that I've seen so many, just dozens and dozens of miracles now, probably more than that. I mean, there's probably hundreds of miracles by now that I've seen, and a lot of them, all of the initial ones in Turkey, now I completely just get it. Like, I don't have any issues with it at all. But back then, in this video, in these pictures here, I had never seen anything like this, where, I mean, these are Muslims. These people don't know anything about Christianity. They know some Greek Orthodox stuff. They know Islam, but they do not know anything about Christianity. And they started coming over, and you can see the lines and lines of people who are coming up. Now, this guy here in the black leather jacket, he was the director of Operation Mobilization in that area. He was the one leading all of this stuff. He was the one who coordinated all the Bible distributions. That guy was awesome. I think he's still in Turkey somewhere. I know he ended up changing his name, because the persecution against him in particular was really, really intense. They would throw rocks through his windows and stuff. I know he changed his name. I think he's in a completely different part of Turkey now, but I think he's still there. So he coordinated all of this stuff, and it was just absolutely awesome. I mean, you can see all these people lining up, and that's me. And I'm kind of there. You can see on my face, like, what in the world is happening right now? Because look at the amount of people who started lining up here. I had never seen anything like. I had been there for a while at this point, and we had done outreaches and had never had anything like this happen before. All these people start showing up, and then people started falling down. And I had seen that on TV, but I had never seen. And these are Muslims, okay? This is the thing that convinced me that this was the real deal. These were not people doing this out of emotion. This was not people trying to impress anybody. These were Muslims who were largely coming up, didn't know anything about this, who were largely coming up just to sort of see what was going on and if it was real or not. And they started falling over and having all kinds of manifestations. I mean, people were having demons cast out of them. I'll go back to this one in a minute. People were having demons cast out of them. I mean, all kinds of just wild, wild manifestations. They're falling over, and just lots and lots of stuff. And it ended up being on the news in Istanbul, and even the news reporter actually ended up coming to Christ during that time. And it was just an absolutely, like, just completely changed my life to see this. So I want to show you this picture. This is actually, you know, some people, they have like their drug labs. This was like the Bible lab. All right, the young guy with the hilarious like movie director hat, and the guy next to him, those were DTS students, and the girl in the Tokyo shirt, those were all DTS students who were there on their DTS outreach. And the rest of us, the other three, the girl with the pink hair, the tall guy in the back, and then myself, we were all on staff. Well, the girl with the pink hair, she was OM, and then the rest of us, we were YWAM staff. And this was the Operation Mobilization Office, where we would prepare all of our Bibles, and we put stickers in them, and you know how to come to the Lord, all kinds of stuff in there. Before we would do that for we would do that for several months usually before it was actually time to go. We would go there from time to time and help out in the office. So I wanted to show you these pictures because it was such a significant day in my life. And this is just another quick one as well. This story here, this is like within the first couple weeks of me being in Turkey. I arrived there, and most of the staff, well actually all the staff that was on my team, they ended up going on furlough for a few weeks. And I was kind of left as like the guy who had to lead this youth group, because one of the ministries was we led the missionary kid youth group in Istanbul. All these kids are missionary kids here. And so I actually, I was asked to be in charge, and temporarily, I was supposed to lead this group. So let me just tell you kind of what happened on this story. This was another one of those days that blew my mind, that God just completely flipped my world upside down. Because remember, I didn't really believe in stuff. Like, I didn't really believe in God coming, and I knew God was active. I knew God moved, and I believed in the power of God, but I didn't believe, or I had never been taught about really how active God gets in your life. And so on this particular day, I was supposed to come to this youth group. This was my very first day to come to this youth group. I was supposed to come here, and the girl standing right next to me doing the peace sign, her name is Michelle. She's still there today in Turkey. And she was supposed to meet me because I was supposed to take a bus to this youth group. She was supposed to meet me and go with me to the youth group along with a couple other of these kids, and they forgot me. And they ended up leaving without me. So I arrived at the place that I was supposed to go on the bus, and whenever I got there, nobody was there. And I got on a phone, and I asked them, you know, I called her, and she's like, "Oh man, we forgot you. Sorry about that." And she said, "Just get on," I'm just throwing a word out here, "get on the H bus, and it will bring you straight here." So I said, okay. Now, I didn't have a phone. I had borrowed a phone from someone. So I give the phone back, get on the bus, and I'm sitting on that bus for a while, and not long, probably, I was on there probably about 10, 15 minutes, when all of a sudden I realized she told me what bus to get on, but she did not tell me when to get off. Like, I had no idea when to get off. And so I started really getting freaked out, scared, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to die in this country, and it's like my third week here. And I'm just like, that's all I'm thinking was, well, I'm dead. I had a good run. It was a good 3 weeks, you know, and made it my first little stint as staff with YWAM, and I'm going to be dead in the first 3 weeks. That's what I'm thinking, because I'm completely freaking out here. And what ended up happening was I stayed on that bus for another 15, 20 minutes, started really thinking like, this is way too long. And all of a sudden, and this is one of the first times, now I mentioned my DTS when I had that vision. Though this was so not common for me, I really didn't know the voice of God back then. I thought I did, but I really didn't. And I'm sitting on this bus, and all of a sudden I felt this, in the olden days they called it the unction. I felt this urge, this like, I have to get off this bus right now. And back then I thought it was just my emotions. Turns out it was actually God speaking to me. I've learned now, when I feel that it's almost always God. And I'm like, I have to get off this bus right now. Like, every emotion in me was like, I got to get off here right now. So I jumped up, and I'm like, because I didn't speak any Spanish. I didn't speak any Turkish back then. And so that all I knew to do was make that noise and just figure, well, if they think I'm crazy, they'll realize I want off the bus. So they stopped the bus. It worked. I get off the bus, go get on the street, and I'm standing there. I have no idea where I am. And I'm standing there thinking, well, I will see what happens now. I get off the bus. Across the street from me, there's a police officer. The police officer looks at me, walks across the street, and in perfect English, he says to me, "Hey, are you looking for the youth group?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Oh, they're in this building right in front of you on the third floor." So I just completely was taken aback. I'm thinking, how can this happen? I mean, I had no idea where I was. I had no idea when to get off that bus. So I go into the apartment building, go up to the third floor, knock on the door that he told me to knock on, and Michelle answers the door. And I go inside, and I took this picture. I was like, we got to take a picture. So I took this picture to remember how God, when you take these steps, when you take these risks, God will completely just be there for you. He will help you. And that I heard somebody just say, it's actually my pastor here in church. He said, "How do you spell faith?" It's R-I-S-K. It's risk. And that is 100% true. That is how you spell faith. Faith is risk every single time. If you're not taking a risk, you're not in faith. Like, you're not walking in faith. Now, that doesn't mean take just random risks. You get a word from the Lord. But I don't remember a time when God told anybody to do anything that wasn't literally a step of faith, that wasn't risk. And so, but when you take those risks, God will move on your behalf. So I wanted to share those stories. Those stories really are important to me and have really shaped who I am. So let's get into the 1040 window, okay? Now, this being a mission school, some of you may already know what the 1040 window is, but just in case you don't, or maybe you don't know the whole story, I just want to very quickly, because most of the people groups we're going to be talking about over the next couple days are going to be in this area. Some of them won't be, but a lot of them will be. So the 1040 window actually was a term that was created in the year 1990 by a man named Lewis Bush. And he was basically looking for a way to define the most unreached people groups in the world. And I just want to check something here. Yes, the most unreached people groups in the world. And so the 1040 window originally was called the 1040 box, but I don't want to go into that whole history on it. Basically, roughly 2/3 of the world population live in the 1040 window. And the 1040 window is mostly Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, animist, Jewish, or atheist. And pretty much all of the governments within the 1040 window are formally or informally, but mostly formally, opposed to Christian work of any kind within their borders. So in a lot of these countries, what you'll see, let's take, for example, India. So India, even though formally or legally it is not against Christianity in most parts, northern India is very different from southern India. But India, for the most part, it is legally not against Christian work, but informally, it is very much against Christian work, especially in the northern part of India. There's severe persecution, a lot of martyrs, a lot of people getting killed for the gospel, a lot of suffering for the gospel, whole villages getting burned down by Hindus just for being Christian. It's the same in Turkey. In Turkey, there's legally freedom of religion, and yet you will be severely persecuted in many parts of Turkey, not all parts of Turkey, but especially Western Turkey is a lot more open than Eastern Turkey. But there is a lot of persecution depending on the area that you're in. And so formally, for the government, it is legal to be a Christian because they want to be part of Europe. But informally, the police and the government often persecute Christians. Just like that pastor who was arrested. He was in Turkey. He had been there for years. And he was arrested. He just was released from prison, thank the Lord. But he was in prison for almost 2 years. And he was a U.S. pastor who went to Turkey and started a church there. and ended up going to prison for it. He didn't do anything criminal. He just started a church, and he was in prison for 2 years in Turkey. So that's just how it is in most of these countries. They will say on one side, yes, we have a freedom of religion. Like China says they have freedom of religion, which they absolutely do not. They say they do, and they even set up all kinds of government-run churches where the pastors are either communists or all of their sermons have to be approved by communists. So it's incredibly watered down gospel. To meet the real Christians, you actually have to go into the underground church, which is the fastest growing church in the world right now. And so these governments, they put on a mask saying that they are open to the gospel, but in practice they are very, very against it. And they just do it to try and, keep peace with other governments and not have, all of these issues. Just going to get a drink of water. So there are, I think I have another slide here. Yes, so here you go. Here's just a quick map. The green is the predominantly Islam nations. The pink is non-religious or communist. Although the map says they're non-religious, actually a large percentage of them, they say they're not. The nation says that they're non-religious, but most of them still continue to practice their traditional religions. Then you have the yellow is Hinduism, the orange is Buddhism, and these are the predominant religions, at least the government declared religions in these different nations. There are approximately 4.9 billion people in the 1040 window. Now, if you think about that, the world is about 7 billion. I guess we're about getting close to 7.5 billion now. But the world is over 7 billion people, and almost 5 billion of that is in this part of the world, is in the 1040 window. So that goes to show you how incredibly dense the populations are, how many people are in these places. I mean, India alone has over 1 billion people in it. That's one nation. Within them, there's 8,209 ethnic groups. And 68.5% of them are unreached people groups. All right, so 5,623 people groups that are unreached. Now, I have to clarify here that, and I said this in the beginning, but I'm just going to say it again. Whenever we are talking about unreached people groups, whenever I use that term, unreached, that is a people group that is 2% to where 2% or less have become Christians. All right, not necessarily that they have heard the gospel, but they have become Christians. So, for example, it goes back and forth, okay? So, for example, there are locations where lots of them, let's just take the Nobe tribe in Panama. The Nobe tribe, they're at about 8% Christian now. So the Nobe, what happened was a few decades ago, there was a huge push. The Nobe were considered unreached. And this is a very common story that happens in many of these nations. And this is why I disagree with that term unreached for being 2%, but we'll get into that in just a minute. So the Nobe were unreached, right? Under 2% were Christian. It was very, very small percentage. They're the largest and poorest tribe south of Mexico and north of South America, so north of Colombia. So there's a big push by missionary organizations. They were in all the books, the Operation World, all these different books that talk about unreached people groups. The Nobe were in it. So all these organizations made this big push to go reach the Nobe people. They all arrive, right? They build all these churches. They get all these people to sign the little card saying that they believe in Jesus now. And they hit that 2% mark. Most of them were there maybe 2 years, because that's how a lot of times it works. They go for 2 years, they stay in one place, and they go somewhere else for 2 years. They're there for 2 years. They get all these Nobe who can't really read or write. They don't have any education. Get them to sign cards saying that they believe in Jesus now. Maybe they baptize them. And then they all pat themselves on the back and say, congratulations, we reached 2%. This people group is now a reached people group. Now, the Nobe are like 400,000 people. 2% is not a lot of people. And so what happened was And you can still go out there today. For those of you who are in Panama, I mean, you can go out in the mountains and find all of these empty churches that were built 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now most of them are stables. Most of them are schoolhouses now. They're used for all kinds of things except for church, except for their original intent. So these people, these missionaries, they went out there, they planted all these churches, and then they said, okay, they're reached, and then they all leave. And what happens is they leave. The population of Christians is still very small. They've only been there for a couple of years, so most of them are not discipled. They can't, especially, let's take tribal groups in particular, they can't read, and unless the Bible has been translated into their language, they can't even read the Bible, even if they can read, unless they learn another language to be able to read it in another language. So they're not very discipled. And all the missionaries, they get a lot of great newsletters. They get a lot of great, pats on the back. Congratulations for everything you've done. But that people group, what happens is over time, because they can't disciple themselves, they start adding in new things, and the whole doctrine ends up being twisted. You go out among the Nobe people, for example, where there are all kinds of different mixed in beliefs now. Some of the churches even have witchcraft. You go into a church and they have bones hanging from the ceiling, and they're singing "Open the Eyes of My Heart," and they've got fetishes, which is what the witchcraft things are called. And so they go into these places, and what happens is they start just making stuff up, or they start incorporating what their old beliefs were because they don't know what else to do because nobody's telling them otherwise. And so what happens is these people groups, they get taken out of all the books, all the, Operation World, all of these unreached people groups, things, tools, say, well, now they're reached because they're over 2%. And then nobody goes to them anymore. People start focusing on everyone else. And so that, all of that to say, I wanted to point out a couple things. First of all, that's what it means when everybody says unreached is 2%. Even though I don't agree with it, we're just going to stay with that because all the maps and all the books and all that, they will use that term 2% or less is unreached. So that's what that means. Second of all, I want you to realize that being unreached does not necessarily, being reached does not mean that they're reached at all. The Nobe, you can go out there all day, every day, and find people who've never even heard of Jesus, and there's churches all around them because the churches don't know to go evangelize, and there's like 5 people in that church. And I mean, you can go all day, every day and evangelize, and there are people who've never heard the name of Jesus before. So saying that they're reached does not mean really that they're reached. And also to give you an understanding that there is a huge need for discipleship. So as I'm going through this, like I said in the first, I think, is it the first or second session, I don't ever want you to feel guilt if you don't feel called to these kinds of areas, because I also realize, honestly, I actually think the vast majority of Christians need to be in reached nations because discipleship is so important. It doesn't really matter all that much if I get somebody to sign a little thing or come and do a little prayer saying that they're a Christian. That is not making a disciple. That's making a decision. But the Bible says to make disciples. And that's why things like the discipleship training school are so key and so valuable, because you have to make disciples. It is so important. You can't just get decisions. You have to make disciples or you're not being effective. It's not an effective thing. And so I just wanted to bring that up, and I will jump back here into these slides. I'm probably going to pull up all these stats again. Okay, so about 3 billion people in that area are considered unreached. They are part of those people groups. Okay, so let's just look at, actually before we do that, let me show you this. Okay, so I don't want to, I think my slides might be messed up a little bit here. Let me just look. Okay, no, we're okay. All right, so let's just look here at these people groups. Now, we have these 3 different populations, right? So in the 1040 window, there's a reason why these people groups are unreached, right? So in the 1040 window, for example, there are 3,500 people groups, so that's about 50%, where the people group, now, okay, let me define people group. People group is a ethnic group of people. So it could be one tribe. It is a tribe or people group, the Turks, for example, that share a culture and a language, not necessarily geography, because a people group can live, they can be in India and they don't necessarily live in one part of India, or they could be in India, but they could also be in Nepal. So whenever we say people group in the 1040 window, that means it. Generally speaking, they're going to be in one place because most tribal groups stay in one spot, at least one general geographic area. But sometimes, like the Jews, for example, the Jews, they have been scattered all throughout the world. So we can tell you, there's X amount of Jews in the world. There's X amount of Jews in this people group. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're all in Israel, because we know that a huge percentage are outside of Israel. So just bear that in mind as well. But there's the reason, this is one of the big reasons why these people groups are unreached are, for example, 50% of the people groups in the 1040 window that are unreached have less than 10,000 people in their population. So these are very small people groups. The truth is, most missionaries, and I've been there too, okay, especially whenever I was just getting to missions, if you've read the missionary stories like I have, and you've read the books and you've seen the movies, and you know all the highlights of these people, like Charles Finney, who just, like, there's one of the most famous stories about him where he just walked into a factory and the Holy Spirit fell and incredible power, and all these factory workers were just like falling over, and he didn't even preach, and they all just started weeping. He was just going in for a tour, and all these people start, they're falling over and they're weeping, and the presence of God was so powerful on them. And the boss, the owner of the factory, had to shut down the factory so that Finney could minister to people there. That's what we all want, right? That's what we all going for. And sometimes we get that. I mean, I can tell you stories, and maybe I will tell you a couple of stories in another session of times when that has happened for me. Similar things like that have happened in my life. Most of us, if you're in ministry long enough, if you're faithful and you stick with the Lord will let you go through those kinds of moments. But the problem with those kinds of books and those kinds of movies and just those kinds of testimonies is that we only get the highlights. It's like, for me personally, I could tell you a few dozen stories like that where I've gone into a hospital. For example, there's been three times now where I've gone into hospitals and dozens of people have been healed just miraculously. I mean, tumors, people getting up out of wheelchairs. But that's over almost 20 years of ministry that I've been in ministry. I'm in my 18th year right now. In 18 years of ministry, there have been there have been 3 times when there have been huge breakouts of miracles. And there have been a couple, maybe 2 dozen other times where really wild miracles have happened. Like I was just in Guatemala this is like, 7-8 months ago now. I was in Guatemala back in December. We were going to have a Christmas party. And so, because our ministry, Guatemala is one of the places that I minister in, we're there, and our ministry bought all the toys for the kids. Twice as many kids came as what we were expecting. And so we prayed over the toys and we prayed over the kids, and we did not have enough toys. We invite all the kids to come up, and we would give out a toy, and the toy would still be on the table. And every boy got a boy toy, every girl got a girl toy, and there was still a toy left over on the table after it was all said and done. And it was a complete multiplication miracle, awesome outbreak of miracles that happened. It was on the news. It was in the front page of the newspaper and everything. And it was, so you get those moments, but the problem is that whenever you only read the highlights, when you only hear the highlights, that's the stuff that you expect that to happen all day, every day. And that's just not how it works. Even if you read the old prophets and the apostles, you can read all of them, these outbreaks of miracles were often, the prophets, if you read Isaiah or Ezekiel, it'll say, in the year of this king, I had this vision. And then it's like 2 years later, and he'll say, in the year of this king. Now, we read it just one chapter after another, so we're thinking that they're just having visions all day, every day of these awesome things. But they didn't. And that's not really how it works. Now, the Holy Spirit will speak to us every day for sure. The Bible is very clear. He's a lamp unto our feet. The Word is a lamp unto our feet, and that we'll hear a voice behind us telling us this is the way to go. The Holy Spirit, of course, will guide you. He'll still talk to you all day. The Holy Spirit will. But in terms of supernatural, miraculous, and like the angels and all these really wild miracles, It doesn't really generally happen every day. Even the greatest revivalists that you see in the world. I mean, look, the prophets, like I said, if you read it, because you read it in like section, you read it just like 5 chapters at a time, you're thinking that these guys were just, wow, constantly in heaven. But they were really a year apart. If you read the book of Acts, there were incredible miracles happening, but it wasn't every single day. It was, you can read Paul. He would minister, he would go to a place, cast demons out of people, and he would minister. And then, it could be a month later, it could be 2 months later, he was in another city and some more miracles happened. But unless you're talking about Jesus himself, there are very few people. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible. It does happen, but I'm just saying most of the time that is not how it works. And the reason I bring that up is definitely not to discourage anyone and say it won't happen, because it absolutely will. The Bible says, as your faith is unto you, you can have it. So you can have it. But what I am trying to point out is that a lot of people really get discouraged, and this does all have to do with the people groups we're looking at here. A lot of people get discouraged because they go into a location and they want to go into the huge people groups, right? They want to go into the people groups that have 1 million people in them, or they want to go to Panama where there's 4 million, 3 million people. Because the mentality is they're going to go in like the guys in their books that they read, which is all true stuff. They go in and they expect their soles of their feet to touch the ground and miracles just explode and revival just to break out all around them. And that, I don't know of that ever happening in a place. I mean, even Jesus was in ministry, and he was 30 years old when he started, and even Jesus, he had revival break out, but he was in ministry for a little bit of time before it really started getting that momentum. Because he was in ministry, but he did some miracles, but he was gathering disciples. He was rejected by a lot of people, and then finally started getting followers, and finally kind of building, and it became the huge momentum that it was. And it can. When you start in ministry, it's just like anything. It can be difficult, but as momentum builds up, of course. I mean, how many ministries that we know that are huge, that are reaching millions of people? I mean, Iris Ministries with Heidi Baker and Freedom Ministries with David Hogan. These are ministries with thousands of churches that have been planted and hundreds of thousands of people that have come to the Lord. And so it can happen, but generally speaking, unless you've already got an established ministry going on, you don't see the huge push. And that isn't because God doesn't want to move. He absolutely does. But the Bible says you can't put a novice in leadership before he has some experience, or they get puffed up with pride, which I've seen that happen over and over again. So all of that whole point being, a lot of these people groups that you're seeing here are unreached because people want the big revival, missionaries especially, because we're so on fire for Jesus and we want to win the world for Jesus, which is wonderful. But most people don't want to go to a people group with 50 people in them because they don't want to give their lives. And it sounds horrible, but it's just the facts. People don't want to go give their lives for 50 people. They will go give their lives for 1 million. But to go to a people group that is only 50, 100, 200 people, most people, especially missionaries, because most missionaries are just pioneers by nature. They just want to go and do something amazing for the Lord, which is a perfectly godly thing to want to do. They want to, but they want it to be big, especially these days, with movies and everything is big. Everything is global. Almost nothing is, there are no stories about the pastor who spent his whole life pastoring 50 people. There just isn't. So our mentality is we've been trained to think everything is huge, and if it isn't huge, if my ministry isn't reaching millions of people, then my ministry is a failure, which is not true. Because for God, I mean, think about Jesus. Jesus, he spent his whole life in one area. Israel is a very small section. And think about after Jesus died and resurrected, there were only 150 people up in the upper room. And he only had 12 disciples. And whenever he was arrested, all of them, except for Peter and John, completely abandoned him. Peter and John, they didn't abandon him in the sense of they didn't run away like everyone else did, but they still stayed at a difference. And Peter denied him. John was actually the only one who went all the way into the courtroom with him. And people, because he was friends with like the high priest and friends with the officials, but that was it. I mean, everybody else left him. So on today's terms, if you were a director of a YWAM base or a leader of a ministry, and you had everybody leave you, and when you died, you only had 150 people still following your teachings, that would not be considered a very successful ministry. But Jesus ended up changing the whole world. Of course, he's the Son of God, ended up changing the whole world. But that is often how ministry works. But most people don't want to do that kind of ministry that Jesus did and just go to a handful of people. They want to just reach the entire planet. And again, that's fine. But this is why a lot of these people groups are unreached. So you can see 1,364 people are under 50,000 and 2,187 are over 50,000 people within that tribe. So let me just pull this up. Okay. So where are we? Where am I? What slide? Okay. So in these people groups here, there are 44 Muslim countries. There are 2 Hindu countries, 8 Buddhist countries, and so there are 54 countries altogether. Now I'm just going to give you some stats here. I don't have a slide with them, but I'll try to say them a little bit slow so you can write them down if you would like. But 82% of the world's poorest people live in the 1040 window. 82% of the world's poorest people live in the 1040 window. 23 of the nations in the window have an average annual income of $500. So think about that. Most people make $500 a lot faster than that in a month. If you're in Panama, that's about a month. And if you're in the United States, that's about a week, what a lot of people make. Those 23 countries have the lowest quality of life in the world. And these statistics are all based on the annual income. So they're based on life expectancy, the ability to access to schools. It's based on all kinds of things. But whenever it all boils down to, 99 of the poorest and least evangelized people live in the 1040 window. Okay, so I want to show you this. Getting back on my topic here of people who are not willing to go. Let me see. So let me just show you this guy here. So this is in Brazil, and returning to the topic, and I always talk about this in this class because I want you to get a heart and an understanding. I want you to get the heart of God for the small groups of people, the small ministries. Try to think beyond. If God has called you to be the next Billy Graham or the next, Todd White or whoever the huge big name evangelist is right now, that's wonderful if that's what God has called you to. But don't lose the opportunity that God may open a door for you that seems small to you. And this is something that I'm learning personally myself. God may open smaller doors for you, especially in the beginning. But small does not mean insignificant. So look at this man here. This is in Brazil. This guy, his name, he is known as the man in the hole. We don't know what his name is. And he is from a tribe in Brazil, has his own language, his own culture. And in his area of Brazil, all of his tribe has been killed by loggers. And because illegal logging is a really big thing in a lot of those South American countries, and the loggers go out there illegally, cut down a bunch of trees and kill anybody who is in that area because they don't want anyone, telling other people what's going on. So this man here, he has been there surviving by himself. You can see in the pictures there, everything's reversed on my screen. The pictures over there, those holes, he digs in the ground. And he lives in those tunnels. And he has tunnels all throughout the land where he lives. And very rare to see him. Some of these pictures here, it's very, very rare to get pictures of him. And he lives out there. So the government of Brazil has put a 33-mile radius around him just for him because they don't want him to get killed. He's the last person of his tribe who is alive. And nobody knows. He's the most isolated man on earth. And that's I believe it's even in the Guinness Book of World Records still as the most isolated man on earth. So my question is, do you believe that God has called somebody to go to him, to reach that one person? remember the Mongolia story, that there were all these people who were called to go to Mongolia and they didn't. I personally believe that right now, with all of these thousands of people groups that nobody has gone to, that there are no missionaries in, I personally believe that God has called there are people who are called, not just one person. I believe there are teams of people that God has called to every single unreached people group in the world, and there are a lot of people who are being completely disobedient. Like our ministry to the Wiwa, the ministry that I do among the Wiwa people, that people group has been there for thousands of years. And there have been some missionaries who have gone, so I'm not saying that nobody's gone. They've gone in and tried to change everything and have not been successful. But the truth is that I believe there should be other people. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even just say people from other nations. There are churches all around. Whenever I am in that part of Colombia, I've gone to many churches. And as a matter of fact, there was one missionary who lived in that area. He was a missionary that was there that I spoke to, and he ministered in a town just 15, maybe 20 minutes away from the tribal people, from the Wiwa people. And whenever we asked him, he had never even heard of them. He had never heard of the Wiwa. So he was doing all this ministry in that area and didn't even know about a completely unreached people group 20 minutes away from him. And so I want you to kind of think about this. Think about how this guy here, I believe that there's someone who is called to him. And I believe that all of these people groups that we're going to be looking at over these sessions, I personally believe that someone is called to them. Now, whether or not you are called to him or to others, that's between you and God. And maybe you're not called to these kind of tribal groups, but somebody is. Somebody is called. All right, let's just continue on. I don't know what words are doing. All right, we are going to, let me think about this. All right, I'm just going to explain this to you real quick. And so this is, we're going to look more at this in the next session. We'll take a break here in just a minute, but I just want to kind of get the foundation set here for this. So this is the 2017 edition. We haven't, the 2018 edition, I don't have that quite yet. This is called the Progress Report Towards Unreached People. And this is by Global Research Data, or data, however you say it. Now, here's the deal. So let me explain this to you. People always ask, so you're not writing down all this just yet. People always ask, where do all these statistics come from? These statistics come from, because we're about to really get into this now with all these maps that you're about to see. We're about to really get into a lot of numbers. So I know I've been saying that, but I like the slow build, right? So all of these statistics that we're getting, this comes from a compilation. So, I mean, you're in a missionary organization. Let's say, you're in YWAM, you're doing your DTS right now. So most people, they come into a missionary organization, they just sort of think that they kind of just applied and got accepted and showed up. And congratulations, you're here. But really, missionary organizations, they actually, whether they seem organized to you or not, they actually do keep records of everything. And so even YWAM, the reason that they know that there are about 20,000 staff in YWAM is because every bases are reporting how many staff they have. Bases are reporting, for every single student that comes in for a DTS, the leaders fill out a form, and at the end of your school, they're going to fill out a whole form about you and how you performed and how well you did and whether you graduated or not, and all these different things about you, and how they fill out all of these forms, and all that goes into a database, and that database is shared with other organizations. And not that those organizations are like looking you up or anything like that, but in the terms of, it will say how many students there were. So YWAM knows how many students and how many staff they've got in general and coming through their schools, because not every base reports everything, because some bases are not fully registered and all that kind of stuff. And so you've got all these things that are going on, but beyond that, there's all the information of, how do we know how many tribal groups there are? How do we know which ones are reached and unreached? Well, different organizations, they send out these reports saying, okay, we're in a tribe, there's 12,000 people in this tribe, there are 10 Christians in this tribe. And so that goes into a report. That report, all of that gets funneled into most organizations. They share their information with each other. There's a lot of these big alliances between organizations. And Of course, there's people like the CIA, there's government information, there's government censuses and all that kind of stuff that all comes together. And these different organizations, like the GSEC status that we're going to be looking at just now, all of these organizations are sharing this. They compile the information, like Operation World and the Joshua Project and these different websites and books. They all gather this information, compile it together into things like this. Excuse me, into things like this where we get all of our statistics. So that's where all these statistics are coming from, and they get updated pretty often. Sometimes not every year, sometimes every other year. It all depends on the organization how often they update. So just want to prepare yourself. Now I'm going to just show you this slide real quick, and then we'll end with this. So that you can have this in mind when we go into our next one. So you're going to see all these different colors on these maps. We're going to go into a lot of maps here in just a minute. Well, after the break. So there are all these 7.3 billion people. So in the world, there are 11,750 people groups. And you'll see there are all these different colors. Whenever you when you see green on the map, it means that they are no longer unreached, which means they are over 2%. And there are 4,700 people groups that are considered no longer unreached. So they are considered reached. If you see yellow or red, these are unreached people groups. There are 7,050 people groups that are considered unreached in the world. Okay, this isn't just the 1040 window. This is the world. When you see yellow, that means that they are engaged but unreached, which means that there are missionaries working with them currently. There's currently active mission work going on among these people, which is 3,800 people groups. And then you've got red, which means unengaged and unreached, which means that there is nobody working among them. So people groups, I guess the WEWA wouldn't be classified as that because we work with them now, but a people group like that, and we'll look at a bunch of these people groups, but these are the people groups that are unengaged and unreached. So there's absolutely nobody working with them right now. They are most of them you see, it's only 220 million people where there's nobody working with them. But these are the people groups that only have about 10,000 people in the tribe itself. There are very few people working with them. So we're going to start, let's just take a break, and then we're going to get into all of these maps, very, very, very detailed maps. We've been looking at some more general stuff up until now, but now we're going to get real specific. We're going to look at a lot of maps, so make sure you got your notebooks, make sure you got whatever you need to take your notes, or I don't know if they let you use phones in your class, but phones or whatever it is that you're using, your laptop, make sure you have it, because we're going to have lots and lots of maps and lots of information coming up. So thank you so much.